All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we have, well, a single source for this deep dive. It's all about some pretty pointed criticisms coming from Rwandan President Paul Kagame.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're looking at excerpts from a recent speech he gave uh, about the crisis in the Democratic Republic of Congo,
Uh,
DRC.
okay.
And he did not mince words, let me tell you.
I bet.
But there's a catch. You see, Kagame's accusations against the DRC and the international community, well, they carry this certain irony.
How so?
Well, considering the criticisms his own WN regime has faced, right?
Yeah.
So that's our mission today, right? To unpack these contradictions, these accusations, and see what we can learn. What do you think?
Sounds fascinating. So Kagame's main argument here, right, is that DRC President Félix Tshisekedi didn't legitimately win the 2018 and even the more recent 2024 elections.
Wow.
And he even goes so far as to claim that major international powers just turned a blind eye to these potential problems with the elections, maybe even with their own interests in mind.
Right. And Kagame doesn't just point fingers.
Yeah.
He makes it clear that this is a serious issue. He states that, and I quote, "If you are a leader and an idiot," and I'm quoting here, "it's a disaster, absolute disaster." He clearly feels strongly about what he sees as, well, a failure of leadership in the DRC.
Yeah, that's a very pointed statement for sure. But the context is really key here, I think. Kagame himself has been in power in Rwanda for, well, nearly 3 decades.
Right.
And in that time, his regime has faced its own share of criticism, about elections and the treatment of political opponents. So Kagame essentially accusing others of the very things that he's been accused of, well, that creates a really fascinating dynamic, don't you think?
Absolutely. Can you give us some specific examples of those criticisms leveled against Kagame's own leadership?
Certainly. So let's go back to 2003 when Kagame ran against Faustin Twagiramungu. He was a former prime minister, actually, who returned from exile to challenge Kagame. There were widespread allegations of irregularities during that election. Then in 2010 and again in 2017, we saw credible opposition candidates, people like Victoire Ingabire and Diane Rwigara, effectively prevented from even running against Kagame.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they were hit with various charges. Some were even imprisoned. So.
Wow. It's almost unbelievable.
Mhm.
But Kagame consistently wins these elections with extremely high percentages of the vote, right?
She's pretty strike.
Like in 2017, for instance, he secured over 98% of the vote.
Yeah.
And that result, understandably, drew skepticism from international observers. This pattern of just overwhelming victories really begs the question.
Yeah.
Are these elections genuinely free and fair? Or is something else going on?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And it's not just about the elections themselves. Kagame is also very vocal in criticizing the international community for what he sees as their passivity towards the ongoing security crises in the Great Lakes region. He even implies that Rwanda is disproportionately bearing the burden of this instability.
Okay, but this is complicated by the fact that Rwanda itself has been accused of playing a role in that very instability, hasn't it? Specifically, there are these allegations about Rwanda's support for the M23 rebels in the DRC.
Exactly. So we see these conflicting narratives at play here. On the one hand, right, you have these accusations against Rwanda for their alleged involvement with the M23 rebels. On the other, Kagame frequently positions himself and Rwanda as victims in this complex geopolitical game, and he uses really powerful language to evoke this sense of being under siege.
And you're right. And in this particular speech, he uses a very striking comparison. He tells the international community, for you, all of this may seem like a simple game of tennis or golf. But for me and my people, it's a matter of life and death.
It's a powerful image for sure. But it's also important, I think, to consider the realities on the ground in Rwanda. Limited freedom of expression, suppressed opposition, a tightly controlled media environment, all of these factors, right, they paint a different picture than the one Kagame presents.
Right. So we're seeing a clear disconnect between his rhetoric and the lived experience of many Rwandans.
Exactly.
Could this be a way for Kagame to strategically position himself as a defender, right, while simultaneously wielding this significant power?
It's certainly a possibility worth considering. And it leads us to another interesting point that Kagame makes about certain countries being hypocritical in their approach to the region. He criticizes them for, condemning some regimes while seemingly overlooking abuses committed by others.
So he's essentially calling out double standards in international relations.
Yes.
And you know what? There might be some truth to that observation, actually.
Right. The international community's actions aren't always perfectly consistent, that's for sure.
Right.
However, we also have to acknowledge that Kagame may be using this argument strategically, right, to attempt to deflect attention from the criticisms directed at his own regime's actions.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how those accusations of hypocrisy play into the larger picture here. After all, the international community has been, well, relatively lenient towards Kagame, right, over the years.
Mm.
Some argue that it's because of his economic successes, like that stability in Rwanda is seen as a priority,
Right.
maybe even outweighing concerns about, human rights or democratic processes.
That's definitely a key point to consider. Rwanda, under Kagame's leadership, has seen significant economic growth and development.
Yeah.
And some analysts even go so far as to suggest that this stability is crucial, really, for Western interests in the region, particularly when it comes to containing the influence of China.
Interesting. So is this a case of the international community just turning a blind eye to these potential problems just in exchange for perceived stability, right?
Yeah.
Are they sacrificing certain values just for, I don't know, economic gains or strategic interests?
It's a difficult question, and there are no easy answers, really. But I think it is important to recognize this tension, to understand that there are often trade-offs involved in how the international community engages with leaders like Kagame.
It's a complex balancing act, isn't it? I mean, on one hand, supporting a country's economic development is a positive goal. But on the other hand, how can we just ignore these potential human rights violations or the lack of democratic freedoms?
Absolutely. This deep dive into Kagame's criticisms, it really highlights how interwoven these issues are. We're not just talking about abstract political concepts here. We're talking about the very real impact these decisions have on people's lives, on their ability to participate in their own governance and on their fundamental freedoms.
Yeah. Right. We've talked a lot about Kagame and his criticisms, but let's shift gears for a moment and delve into the DRC crisis itself. Like, what are some of the root causes of this conflict, and how have they kind of contributed to the current situation?
Well, the conflict in the DRC it's deeply rooted and it's multifaceted. It's this complex web of ethnic tensions, resource exploitation, and political instability. For decades, the DRC has been plagued by violence and conflict fueled by competition over, well, its vast mineral wealth, really. Neighboring countries, including Rwanda, well, they've often been drawn into these conflicts, which, exacerbates the situation.
And how has this ongoing conflict shaped the relationship between Rwanda and the DRC?
Um, well, the relationship between the two countries is deeply strained, to say the least. It's marked by mistrust and accusations. Rwanda has repeatedly intervened in the DRC, citing security concerns and the need to protect its own borders.
Hmm.
However, these interventions have, well, often been criticized for fueling further instability and contributing to human rights abuses.
Right. So we have these historical tensions, right, and these ongoing conflicts. And then Kagame steps in and levels these really sharp criticisms against the DRC's leadership and the international community.
Right.
It's hard not to see the parallels between the accusations that he's making and those directed at him.
Yeah, the similarities are striking. And it's not just about Kagame as an individual, right? This situation reflects this broader pattern we see in the Great Lakes region and in many other parts of the world, really, where leaders often employ this kind of double standard, criticizing others for actions that, well, they themselves are engaged in.
It seems like this vicious cycle of accusations and counter-accusations,
Hmm.
making it difficult to discern truth from political maneuvering.
I agree.
Where does that leave us? What can we take away from all of this?
I think the key takeaway is this. We can't simply accept these accusations at face value, whether they're coming from Kagame or directed at him. We need to dig deeper, consider the historical context, the potential motivations behind the rhetoric and the complex realities on the ground.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, isn't it? Trying
Yeah.
to see the bigger picture by examining all the different pieces and how they fit together.
Precisely. And I think that's where our listener comes in, right?
Yeah.
We've presented the information, we've highlighted the contradictions and explored the various perspectives. Now
Right.
it's up to you, the listener, to draw your own conclusions.
That's what makes these deep dives so compelling, right? It's not about being told what to think,
Right.
but about gaining the knowledge and insights needed to form your own informed opinions.
Exactly. And to help you along in that process, I want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question. Is it possible for both Kagame's accusations and the accusations against him to be true at the same time? What does that tell us about the complexities of power, politics, and the search for truth in a region as turbulent as the Great Lakes?
Yeah, it really makes you think, and it kind of speaks to the very heart of, the challenges we face when we're trying to understand these complex geopolitical situations, right?
Yeah.
We often encounter these layers of truth, right? Intertwined with these strategic narratives, power dynamics, historical baggage. It it rarely boils down to this simple good versus evil scenario. You know what I mean?
You're absolutely right. And I think that this is where um, critical thinking becomes absolutely essential.
Right.
We need to develop that ability to sift through information, to question assumptions, to consider multiple perspectives, and to recognize that there are often shades of gray in these situations.
Yeah. It's almost like we need to become detectives, examining the evidence, weighing the different accounts, and looking for those hidden clues, right? That can help us piece together a more complete picture.
I like that analogy, and that's precisely the kind of mindset, right, that we want to encourage in our listeners.
Right.
We don't want to present this singular definitive truth,
Yeah.
but rather to provide you with the tools and insights that you need to form your own informed conclusions.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Kagame's criticisms,
Mhm.
what are some key takeaways, right, that you hope our listeners will walk away with?
Well, I would say that the first is to recognize that inherent complexity, right, of the situation in the Great Lakes region. There are no easy solutions here, and any attempt to understand this conflict requires a nuanced approach.
Right.
Second, I think we need to be aware of the potential for double standards and strategic narratives in political discourse. Leaders often use language, to advance their own interests.
Right.
And it's important to be able to see through that rhetoric and critically assess their claims.
Yeah. And finally, I'd add that it's crucial to remember the human cost of these conflicts.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about, these abstract political debates. We're talking about the real lives and experiences of people, who are directly impacted by the violence and instability in the region.
Absolutely. We can't lose sight of that human dimension. Behind every headline, every political speech, there are individuals and communities grappling with the very real consequences of these events.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and
Mhm.
I hope our listener feels, better equipped to navigate the complexities of this issue, right?
Yeah.
Remember, it's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the tough questions, to think critically, and to engage with these challenging topics in a thoughtful and informed way.
I couldn't agree more. So until our next deep dive together, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking out those deeper layers of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us.